The day you stop trying to belong is the day your real life begins. Most people will never experience this freedom, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. This insight changes how you see yourself, others, and the world forever. There's a moment in life, quiet, unsettling, almost invisible, when you realize that the need to belong has been guiding more of your choices than truth ever did. You didn't notice it at first, because belonging feels safe. It feels human. But underneath that comfort, something essential has been slipping away: yourself. Carl Jung understood that the deepest transformation doesn't begin with confidence or success. It begins when you stop outsourcing your identity to the crowd. This video is about that moment, the moment you stop adjusting your soul to fit rooms that were never meant for you, the moment loneliness stops being a curse and starts becoming a compass. What most people fear is not being alone. It's standing face to face with who they really are once the noise fades. And yet, that confrontation is exactly where freedom, clarity, and inner authority are born. What you're about to hear isn't comforting, but it is liberating. You'll understand why belonging often costs more than it gives, why standing alone is not failure but initiation, and why the strongest people don't try to be understood by everyone. By the end of this, you won't just think differently. You'll see your life through a sharper, more honest lens. And once that shift happens, there's no going back. There's a quiet moment, almost invisible, when you stop trying to fit in, and something inside you finally exhales. You may not notice it at first, but it feels like putting down a heavy bag you've carried for years. Belonging, when forced, is exhausting. It demands constant adjustment, constant self-editing. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people never realize how much of their identity they've traded just to feel accepted. Individuation doesn't start with confidence. It starts with fatigue. You get tired of pretending, tired of shrinking, tired of performing. And that tiredness, that's not weakness, that's the psyche asking for freedom. Think of belonging like renting a house that was never built for you. You rearrange the furniture, paint the walls, smile at the neighbors, but deep down, it never feels like home. Authenticity is ownership. The moment you stop begging for approval, the self steps forward. Loneliness often shows up here, and yeah, it stings. But solitude and loneliness aren't the same thing. One drains you, the other strengthens you. When you choose selfhood over belonging, you don't become empty. You become spacious. That space is where awareness grows. That space is where truth starts whispering. You've seen this in real life, even if you didn't name it. The artist who stops chasing trends and suddenly creates something timeless. The professional who leaves a prestigious job because it kills their soul, and later builds something meaningful. The friend who stops people-pleasing and loses many relationships, but gains peace. These moments feel like losses, but they're initiations. Jung understood this deeply. The psyche doesn't reward conformity with meaning. Meaning comes from alignment. And alignment often costs you your seat at the table. Here's something practical you can do. Notice where you edit yourself. Pay attention to the rooms where your voice gets quieter, the conversations where your instincts say one thing, but your mouth says another. Write those moments down. That's shadow work in everyday life. Read authors who challenge you instead of validating you. Jung, Viktor Frankl, even Napoleon Hill when he talks about self-mastery. Spend time alone without distractions. No scrolling, no noise. Just you and your thoughts. It'll feel awkward at first, like silence shouting back at you, but that's where the psyche reorganizes itself. When belonging dies, something truer takes its place. But it doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives quietly, like dawn. You start trusting yourself a little more. You stop asking for permission. And without realizing it, you're no longer orbiting the crowd. You're standing at your own center. That's when freedom starts feeling real. But this is just the first threshold. Because once you step away from the need to belong, You begin to notice how much the collective resists those who choose authenticity over approval. Belonging always comes with a hidden invoice, and most people never read the fine print. At first it feels harmless, just adapting a little, softening an opinion, laughing at jokes you don't find funny. But over time, those small compromises stack up like unpaid debt. You wake up one day and realize you've been living on borrowed identity. The collective doesn't ask for your soul all at once. It takes it in installments. And the scary part, it rewards you for it. Approval, praise, inclusion, those things feel good, almost addictive. But they come at the cost of something quieter and far more valuable, your inner authority. Think of the self like a compass. Every time you betray it to belong, the needle bends just a little. Eventually you're moving fast, but in the wrong direction. This is why so many people feel anxious even when life looks right on paper. Good job, social circle recognition, yet something feels off. That off feeling isn't ingratitude, it's misalignment. Individuation demands honesty, and honesty disrupts comfort. Jung warned that the greatest danger isn't rejection, it's unconscious adaptation. When you live by borrowed values, you slowly disappear from your own life. You see this everywhere. In workplaces where everyone speaks the same language and thinks the same thoughts. In families where unspoken rules matter more than truth. In friendships that survive only as long as you stay predictable. The collective loves consistency, not authenticity. The moment you change, really change, you'll feel the temperature drop. Fewer invitations, awkward silences, subtle resistance. That's not a sign you're wrong. That's the system reacting to someone who stopped feeding it their identity. Here's a grounded practice. Audit your agreements. Ask yourself, where am I saying yes out of fear? Fear of being excluded, judged, misunderstood. Start small. Say no once where you'd usually comply. Speak one honest sentence you'd normally swallow. Notice the discomfort and survive it. You will. Read books that reinforce inner independence, not social performance. Revisit thinkers who emphasize self-trust and meaning over popularity. The goal isn't rebellion, it's coherence. You're not trying to shock anyone, you're trying to stop lying to yourself. Once you see the cost of belonging, you can't unsee it. You begin to recognize how often people trade depth for safety. And something inside you resists doing that ever again. But this resistance brings a new challenge, standing alone without becoming bitter, isolated, or defensive. Because losing the crowd is one thing. Learning how to stand on your own feet without applause is something else entirely. And that's where the real initiation begins. There's a moment after you step away from the crowd when silence gets loud. No applause, no validation, no one telling you you're doing the right thing. And if you're not prepared, that silence can feel like failure. But it isn't. It's initiation. Every meaningful transformation begins with a separation. The psyche needs distance from the noise to reorganize itself. When you stand alone, you're not being punished, you're being tested. Tested for honesty, resilience, and the courage to live without borrowed certainty. Think of it like learning to walk without leaning on a wall. At first, your legs shake. You doubt your balance. You wonder if the wall was safer. But the wall never made you strong. It only made you dependent. Standing alone forces you to feel your own weight, your own direction. This is why solitude often precedes clarity. Jung understood that individuation requires a withdrawal from collective values, not forever, but long enough to hear your own inner rhythm again. You've seen people confuse solitude with being broken. They rush back to noise, relationships, or distractions just to avoid that uncomfortable in-between. But the ones who stay, the ones who don't run, come back different, sharper, calmer, more grounded. They don't need to announce who they are. It shows in how they move. Real confidence doesn't shout, it settles, and that settling only happens when you've faced yourself without witnesses. Practically speaking, this is where structure matters. Create intentional solitude. Walk without headphones. Journal without censoring yourself. Ask uncomfortable questions like, if no one was watching, how would I actually live? Limit constant social input for a while. News, opinions, endless advice. Replace it with depth. Read works that strengthen inner discipline and self-trust. Study thinkers who faced isolation and didn't collapse under it. Solitude, when chosen, becomes training, not exile. Standing alone strips away performance. You begin to notice which desires are truly yours and which ones were inherited from expectation. This phase can feel unstable, even scary, because there's no script. But instability isn't chaos, it's potential. You're not lost, you're unconditioned. And as this inner structure forms, something unexpected starts happening. You become harder to manipulate, harder to rush, harder to pull back into old patterns. And that's when the collective starts pushing back. The moment you stop being predictable, you become uncomfortable to others. Not dangerous, just unsettling. The collective runs on patterns. It prefers people who repeat themselves, who fit cleanly into roles, who don't challenge the rhythm of the group. When you start thinking independently, you disrupt that rhythm, and disruption is often mistaken for arrogance or rebellion. But what's really happening is simpler. You're no longer easy to manage. Predictability makes you safe to categorize. Authenticity makes you difficult to label. Think of the collective like a machine that runs smoothly only when every gear behaves as expected. The gear that spins differently doesn't break the machine, but it does expose its fragility. That's why change is often met with subtle punishment, distance, sarcasm, exclusion. You're not being rejected for doing something wrong. You're being resisted for doing something new. Jung knew that individuation threatens group identity because it reveals how much of that identity is built on imitation, not truth. You've probably felt this shift yourself. When you stop agreeing automatically. When you pause before saying yes. When your values start guiding your decisions more than external rewards. Suddenly, people question your motives. They say you've changed, as if change were betrayal. But stagnation is far more dangerous than evolution. Growth looks like inconsistency to those who benefit from you staying the same, and the more grounded you become, the more visible this dynamic gets. Here's a practical way to navigate this without becoming defensive. Stop explaining yourself unnecessarily. Explanation is often a request for permission in disguise. Instead, let consistency in your actions speak for you. Anchor your routines in what matters: meaningful work, physical movement, reflection, learning. When challenged, respond calmly, or not at all. Read thinkers who reinforce inner sovereignty. Train your nervous system to tolerate misunderstanding. Being misunderstood is a skill, and like any skill, it gets easier with practice. As predictability falls away, something else rises: clarity. You see how many relationships were built on convenience, not connection. And while that realization can sting, it also frees you. Because once you stop needing to be liked, you can start being real. But reality has consequences. The collective doesn't adapt easily to those who individuate. It tests them, pressures them, and if you're not careful, that pressure can pull you back into old habits, or force you into a deeper kind of solitude altogether. Loneliness isn't a punishment, it's a signal. When you stop numbing yourself with constant connection, the silence starts speaking. And what it says isn't always comfortable. Most people confuse loneliness with something being wrong, when in reality, it often means something is finally being heard. Individuation speaks softly at first. It doesn't shout over distractions. It waits until the noise fades. That's why so many people avoid being alone. They're afraid of what their own psyche might reveal once there's nowhere left to run. Think of loneliness like learning a new language. At first, it feels foreign and awkward. You don't understand the pauses, the strange emotional echoes, the restlessness, but slowly, patterns emerge. You begin to recognize old fears, unprocessed grief, forgotten desires. This isn't regression, it's retrieval. Jung believed that what remains unconscious controls us. Loneliness brings those contents into the light, not to punish you, but to integrate you. Avoiding it only delays wholeness. You can see this clearly in modern life. Endless notifications, background noise, constant entertainment, all designed to keep you from sitting with yourself. But the psyche doesn't heal through stimulation. It heals through attention. The people who grow the most are often the ones who can tolerate quiet without panicking. They don't fill every gap with sound or company. They listen, and in listening, they recover parts of themselves they didn't know were missing. Here's how to work with loneliness instead of fighting it. Schedule intentional alone time, not as escape, but as inquiry. Sit with a notebook and write without structure. Walk slowly, noticing thoughts instead of suppressing them. Reduce digital noise, even briefly. Read texts that explore the inner world with honesty. Depth psychology, philosophy, reflective literature. Loneliness loses its sting when it becomes purposeful. It transforms from ache into guidance. As you learn this language, something changes. Loneliness no longer feels like emptiness. It feels like presence. You stop chasing people to fill gaps that were never meant to be filled externally. And with that shift comes a new challenge, realizing that not everyone can follow you into this depth. Some will misunderstand your quiet, others will project onto it, and navigating that misunderstanding requires a different kind of strength, the kind that doesn't seek validation, but stands steady in self-knowledge. There's a strange relief that comes when you accept this truth. You were never designed for universal understanding. The need to be understood by everyone is a quiet form of self-erasure. You simplify yourself, you round off sharp edges, you translate your depth into something more digestible. But depth doesn't translate well. It intimidates, it confuses, and that's not a flaw. It's a filter. Jung understood that individuation naturally narrows your audience, not because you're superior, but because you're specific. Think of it like tuning a radio frequency. When you're trying to appeal to everyone, the signal gets fuzzy, noise everywhere. But when you tune precisely, fewer people hear it, and those who do really hear it. Being misunderstood isn't always a communication problem. Sometimes it's a resonance issue. Your inner world has its own language, and only those who've traveled inward themselves can recognize it. Everyone else hears distortion and calls it strange. You've probably felt the frustration of explaining yourself over and over, hoping this time it'll land. But clarity doesn't always lead to connection. Some people aren't confused. They're just not ready. And chasing their understanding pulls you back into performance mode. Jung warned that the worst fate isn't being misunderstood by others, but misunderstanding yourself. When you start valuing inner alignment over external comprehension, a subtle confidence replaces the urge to justify your existence. Here's something practical. Stop over-explaining your choices. Explanation often comes from fear, not generosity. Choose instead to embody your values. Let your life become the argument. Invest time in pursuits that deepen you, not impress others. Study psychology, philosophy, creative work. Keep a private journal where you don't have to translate anything. Protect one space in your life where you're fully unedited. That space becomes your anchor when misunderstanding shows up. Once you accept that universal understanding was never the goal, you stop taking confusion personally. You become less reactive, less defensive. And ironically, that's when real connection starts appearing, rare but profound. A few people begin to see you clearly, not because you explained better, but because you stopped trying to be legible to everyone. Yet this clarity brings another realization. Being seen deeply is far more demanding than being liked superficially. And not everyone can handle that kind of intimacy. There's a precise moment when approval loses its grip on you. It doesn't happen loudly. It happens when praise no longer excites you and criticism no longer terrifies you. That's the doorway. The self doesn't appear while you're negotiating your worth with the crowd. It waits until you stop asking, "Is this okay?" Approval keeps you fragmented, one version here, another there. When it ends, those fragments start pulling together. You don't become perfect, you become coherent. And coherence is power. Picture approval like training wheels. Useful at first, necessary even, but if you keep them on forever, you never really ride. The moment you remove them, there's wobble, uncertainty, maybe a fall or two. But balance only comes when the risk is real. Jung believed the self emerges through tension, not comfort. When you stop outsourcing validation, you begin to feel your own center of gravity. Decisions start coming from inside, not from fear of reaction. You notice this shift in small, almost mundane ways. You choose what matters instead of what looks good. You rest without guilt. You speak honestly without rehearsing how it'll land. The nervous urge to be liked slowly fades. This isn't detachment, it's maturity. People who live on approval feel busy but hollow. People rooted in the self feel calm but intense. One chases mirrors, the other becomes a source. To practice this, start by removing one approval habit. Stop checking reactions immediately after you speak. Delay responses instead of rushing to please. Make one decision a week based purely on alignment, not optics. What you read, how you train your body, where you invest your energy. Read works that emphasize inner authority and purpose. Build rituals that don't earn applause. Early mornings, physical discipline, reflection. These quiet acts strengthen the spine of the psyche. As approval fades, something unsettling happens. You realize how much of your past behavior was negotiated, not chosen. That realization can sting, but it also liberates. You begin to feel a steadiness that doesn't depend on mood or feedback. And with that steadiness comes a new challenge. Once you stop seeking approval, others may start projecting their fears onto you. Managing that projection without shrinking or hardening becomes the next test. Here's a hard truth most people avoid. Many would rather live a false life than face rejection. Rejection feels immediate, sharp, public. False living feels gradual, quiet, private. So the psyche chooses the lesser short-term pain, even if it costs decades. You see it in careers chosen for status, relationships maintained for appearance, beliefs inherited without question. Jung understood that fear, when unconscious, becomes a life strategy. And that strategy keeps people busy, not fulfilled. Think of false living like wearing shoes that don't fit. At first, it's uncomfortable but manageable. You tell yourself you'll get used to it. Over time, it changes how you walk. Eventually, you forget what it felt like to move freely. Rejection, on the other hand, is like taking the shoes off in public. Awkward, maybe embarrassing, but instantly relieving. One hurts fast and heals. The other numbs slowly and deforms. You can spot this fear everywhere. People laugh too quickly, agree too often, stay silent when something feels wrong. They call it being easygoing, but it's usually self-abandonment in disguise. Individuation asks a dangerous question. What would you choose if rejection wasn't the threat? Most people never ask it because the answer would force change, and change risks isolation before it brings meaning. Here's something practical. Rehearse rejection. Sounds strange, but it works. Intentionally voice a small, unpopular opinion. Decline an invitation that doesn't align. Set a boundary without over-justifying it. Notice what happens. You survive. The world doesn't collapse. Your nervous system learns a new truth. Rejection isn't death. Pair this with strengthening your inner life, physical training, learning, reflection, so your sense of worth has roots, not mirrors. Once rejection loses its terror, false living loses its grip. You stop needing to perform a version of yourself that keeps the peace at the cost of truth. But this freedom brings clarity, and clarity exposes something uncomfortable. Many connections were built on the false version. Letting go of that version changes everything. And the next challenge becomes learning how to see others clearly without resenting them for choosing comfort over authenticity. When you step outside the crowd, your vision changes. Not because you're smarter, but because you're no longer immersed in the same current. Distance creates perspective. The outsider notices patterns the insider can't afford to see. Jung understood that insight often comes from the margins, not the center. When you're no longer invested in fitting in, your perception sharpens. You start seeing contradictions, unspoken rules, and collective blind spots that once felt invisible. Think of it like standing on a hill instead of in the valley. From below, everything feels urgent and chaotic. From above, connections appear. The crowd experiences intensity. The outsider gains clarity. This is why prophets, innovators, and thinkers are often isolated before they're understood. Their distance isn't arrogance, it's geometry. You can't see the whole pattern from inside it. Stepping back isn't withdrawal, it's recalibration. You might notice this in conversations. You hear what isn't being said. You sense emotional undercurrents. You recognize when enthusiasm is manufactured or when fear is driving agreement. This awareness can feel heavy at first. It's tempting to wish you could unsee it, but awareness is irreversible. Once the psyche expands, it doesn't shrink back comfortably. And that's where responsibility enters. Seeing clearly means choosing consciously. To develop this vision, practice observation without judgment. Watch group dynamics instead of reacting to them. Study psychology, history, and human behavior, fields that reveal repeating patterns. Reduce emotional reactivity. Clarity fades when you're entangled. Spend time reflecting on your reactions. Why did that bother me? What assumption was challenged? The outsider isn't cold, they're attentive. This attention becomes a quiet advantage. As your perception deepens, you may feel more separate, not superior, just different. This separation isn't permanent, but it is formative. You're no longer hypnotized by consensus, and with that freedom comes a final realization: seeing clearly isn't enough. The real challenge is choosing where and with whom you truly belong once you understand the cost of unconscious crowds. At some point, everything you've lived through converges into one unavoidable truth. If you don't belong to yourself, every other form of belonging will be fragile. You'll cling, adapt, negotiate, and still feel replaceable. Jung saw this clearly. The psyche needs a home before it can share space with others. Without inner allegiance, you become a guest in your own life. You exist everywhere, but you stand nowhere. And that quiet instability leaks into every relationship, every decision, every ambition. Think of self-belonging like planting roots before building walls. Without roots, any structure collapses under pressure. When you belong to yourself, you don't disappear when challenged. You bend, but you don't break. You can disagree without panic. You can be alone without emptiness. This isn't isolation. It's internal grounding. The people who truly belong anywhere are the ones who don't need to. Their presence is chosen, not begged for. You feel this shift internally before it shows externally. You stop over-investing too quickly. You listen more than you perform. You choose environments that respect your depth instead of draining it. False urgency fades. You don't rush intimacy, friendships, or commitments just to avoid being alone. This patience isn't indifference, it's discernment. You're no longer looking for a place to hide. You're looking for resonance. Practically, belonging to yourself means building inner infrastructure, daily reflection, physical discipline that anchors you in your body, Intellectual nourishment, reading thinkers who challenge and strengthen you. Emotional honesty without self-pity. It also means boundaries, knowing when to leave rooms that require you to fragment. You don't announce this shift, you live it. And people feel it before they understand it. When you finally belong to yourself, something paradoxical happens. You're able to belong with others more authentically, or walk away without bitterness. Connection stops being survival and becomes choice. But this choice opens a deeper question, one that lingers beneath everything you've explored so far. If belonging begins within, how do you live in a world that profits from keeping people disconnected from themselves? Now it's on you. Not tomorrow, not when life slows down, right now. Take a hard look at where you're still trading authenticity for comfort, truth for approval, depth for belonging. Ask yourself honestly, where did I abandon myself just to stay accepted? That question alone can rearrange a life. And if it makes you uncomfortable, good. Discomfort is the signal that something real is trying to emerge. Don't let this remain just insight. Turn it into action. Choose one space in your life, work, relationships, routines, where you'll stop performing and start aligning. Speak one honest sentence you've been holding back. Walk away from one environment that demands you fragment yourself. Spend time alone without numbing it away. Read, reflect, train your body and mind. Individuation isn't dramatic. It's built through small, consistent acts of self-loyalty. And here's the provocation. If you keep living the way you've been living, where will you be in 5 years? Still fitting in? Still explaining yourself? Still waiting for permission? Or finally standing on your own psychological ground, choosing connection instead of needing it? The crowd won't answer that for you, only you can. If this message resonated, don't let it fade into the noise. Subscribe to Mind Silent Echo, activate notifications, and stay with us. This channel exists for those who are done living unconsciously and ready to face the deeper work of becoming whole.